Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade, number 89. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. This is another one of those symphonies nobody plays, nobody knows, nobody pays attention to. It's surrounded by masterpieces, and it is in itself a masterpiece. It's fabulous. It's in F major, and it's like... You see, 88 and 89 were these two singleton pieces. Before them came the 6 Paris symphonies. After them came 3 more Paris symphonies, and then the London symphonies. And so these two were sort of singletons that Haydn wrote for Prince Esterhazy. 88 has always been regarded as one of the touchstones of the classical symphonic style. There are a few reasons why 89, I think, doesn't get quite the same amount of attention. It's just as lovely in so many ways and has fabulously individual qualities. It doesn't sound like any other Haydn symphony. And the reason is because around 1887, I think it was, Haydn wrote a bunch of concerti and nocturnes, which means divertimenti, sort of light music, for Ferdinand IV. I think he was the fourth, but he was a Ferdinand, the King of Naples, who was a pal of Prince Esterhazy, and Esterhazy lent him out to write these works. They are delicious works. The problem is, and there are 5 concertos that Haydn wrote. The problem is that the solo instrument was this contraption called the lira organizzata. Now, no one is quite sure what a lira organizzata sounded like. It was apparently a partly mechanical bowed hurdy-gurdy. You'd heard a crank, a bow went back and forth. It must have been just grotesque. But then Ferdinand was grotesque. He was a despot. He was not a benevolent despot. When he wasn't torturing his subjects, he was playing this gizmo. And so Haydn wrote these pieces, and he knew that no one else in the universe was ever going to hear them because, who played a lira organizzata? So he arranged them for flute and oboe as these solo instruments, as like sort of double concertos. They're lovely. They don't get played. They really ought to get played. And he used some of the movements from them in other works as well, possibly movements that Prince Esterhazy particularly enjoyed. In any case, Symphony No. 89 has 2 movements, the slow movement and the finale, which are based on the 5th concerto. So if you want to go listen to the concertos and listen to the 5th, it's in 3 movements, and it's got 2 movements from this symphony. But Haydn did not, of course, leave them the way they were in the concertos. He adjusted them considerably. And in particular, because these were concerto movements and they featured 2 solo woodwinds, he turned the entire symphony, including the movements that have nothing to do with the concerto, into a rich, juicy, fabulously orchestrated dialogue between the strings and the winds. So the winds have solos all over the place, but not as in a concerto. They're not fixed. He uses his wind ensemble, which consists of a flute, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, and 2 horns as part of that ensemble, in a bazillion colorful and interesting ways. It's absolutely marvelously wonderful. And he did some other things also to make the movements bigger and more symphonic, if you might want to call it that, more than Ferdinand probably could have handled. But he created an entirely new symphony out of them. There's no indication of any, sort of excessive haste or, I'm just reusing stuff because I'm lazy and don't feel like doing it. He did fabulous things with this material. He used the concerto as the touchstone for the symphony. So you should never think of the symphony as just sort of like recycled garbage. Unfortunately, I think because he used some pre-existing material, even though nobody listens to it, knows what it was, it's dogged the reputation of this symphony. So it's not as popular as it ought to be, because boy, is it a joy to listen to. And timbrally, it's marvelous. But also, one of the other things that's the consequence of what Haydn did is that because the entire symphony is essentially an essay in the alternation between strings and winds and constant dialogue with each other. He doesn't have to do as much as he would normally do in terms of unifying the symphony with shared motives and things between the movements. He does it. But it's not as important because he's already got his concept in place. I mean, the symphony is already going to be a totally original, organic, unified thing just because of this process of constant dialogue and alternation between strings and woodwinds, either alone or in marvelous combinations. So it's a very easy symphony to digest as well. It really, really is. And so we don't need to go into it in that much more detail. I'm going to play you some fabulous examples that I figured out. And because it's such a clear and simple symphony in terms of its organization, I can raise a couple of issues about performance practice and things that I've wanted to talk about, but was looking for a good spot. And this is a good spot, as you will hear momentarily. So the symphony has no slow introduction. It begins, the first movement is completely original, and it begins with a 5-note ya da 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 dum. Very, very simple. That is not repeated in any particular movement, but it generates a family of themes that most of which begin that way. Not with those notes, with the shape up and down. Do, 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 do. It's a parabola, if you want to call it that, or something like that. So virtually every single theme in this symphony has a parabolic shape at the start, like the finale. Dun dun da 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 da. See, it goes parabolic, and you'll hear that. So that's something you can keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that after the parabola, there are little repeated note figures, which you always hear in Haydn, which you know he's using as his Lego blocks. Dun dun dun, bum bum bum, bum 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 bum. Either 2 notes or 3 notes. It doesn't make any difference. He uses those constantly throughout all 4 movements, and you'll hear those too. You can listen to them and notice them as you please. It's a very handy sort of gluing technique to generate coherence in between movements. So that you're also going to hear. And with that, the only other thing I want to point out, I suppose, well, let me play you the second subject. The second subject is, it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful theme. It's in parabolic shape. And it features the strings followed by the solo oboe and flute. The solo flute gets a lot to do in this symphony, a lot of interesting decorative elements throughout the work. But this is a particularly juicy moment, and you'll hear what I mean by dialogue between strings and winds. It's just a very handy way to make the point, as Haydn does. So here it is, the second theme, the second subject in the first movement. Very simple, right? Strings, oboe, lovely, and bassoon, and flute. And they come in and they burble and chuggle. And it must be a wonderful thing for the woodwind guys to play, if anybody would ever play it, of course. So let's listen to the entire first movement exposition now. And then you can just go nuts all by yourself. Well, almost. We'll have one more point to make, actually. So who do you have here? It's the Austro-Hungarian Haydn Orchestra again with Adam Fischer on Nimbus. Thank you for permission to use this material in this series of talks. And let's just go for it. Oh, this is gorgeous. Ready? Here you go. Now, actually, there are 2 other points I want to make about this movement. First of all, we'll save one for later. But the other major point I want to make is that at this point in his symphonic career, Haydn is still writing second half movement repeats in his sonata movements, most of them. We remember some of them did not. Back in the 60s somewhere, and there were some movements that he left out. Number 80, for example, its first movement has no second half repeat. He was conscious of this always. And he was one of the very, very few composers of this period for whom the repeat of the second half, which starts at the development section, remember the exposition would be repeated, then you have the development and the recapitulation. And so the second half repeat begins at the beginning of the development section. And he designed the beginning of his development sections as often as not, knowing that there would be a repeat. They're almost universally not played these days. And I mean, period instrument people will often do them, but just as often they won't, even though they tend to take as many repeats as they can. Second half repeats, for some reason, don't usually get much attention. And that's a pity, when Haydn has really taken pains to let you know that the second half repeat it matters, that he intended it to be heard. And this is one of those symphonies. And this performance doesn't do it. So I have done a little thing. I want you to hear the opening of the development section after the end of the exposition. And then I'm going to play you the end of the movement. And I have taken it back and added the repeat myself with a little editing. It's not a perfect thing because the second half is not repeated in this performance. Fischer makes a bit of a retard on the last two chords and makes them extra emphatic and slows them down. Whereas if you played it in strict tempo and then went back, it would all sound more logical. But you'll get the sense of it because the opening of the exposition is a loud, the development section, is a loud, bustling thing. And this loud, bustling thing sounds really good after the end of the exposition, and it sounds even better after the end, what will become eventually the ending of the whole movement, to go back to that business in a slightly different perspective, because, of course, the end of the exposition ends in this key, and the end of the movement ends in sort of that key, sort of, kind of. And so it sometimes you don't even notice that you're going back to the beginning of the development because the contrast of key and harmony is so different. But here you do, and you just listen to this little example I've mocked up, I've ginned up, so you can get a sense of what Haydn's intentions really were and how we so seldom hear them honored. And it's such a pity because, who doesn't have an extra 3 minutes if you've schlepped all the way out to the symphony concert in the first place, or 4 minutes? Why not hear it again and get a double dose of wonderfulness? Beats me. Anyway, here is that bit. It's the exposition leading to the opening of the development, and then the very end of the movement leading back to the beginning of the development. Here you go. So like I said, it's not perfect, but it does give you, I think, a very good sense of what Haydn's intentions were. And what's interesting is that after Symphony number 96, which is actually the first of the London symphonies, he writes no more first movement repeats, second half repeats. Instead, he writes large codas, big developmental codas. He just got rid of it entirely because evidently it wasn't being treated in the way he wanted it to be treated, or I think more likely is that he was just such a highly developmental kind of composer that he just wanted to give us more and new stuff, which was very nice of him. So that's the first movement. Well, let's do the whole exposition of the first movement, right? Did we do that? Here. Great stuff. And you can go and have a fabulous time all on your own. Now, the second movement is a Siciliano. Remember Sicilianos? They're in 6/8 time mostly. They go da 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 do do do. Silent Night is a Siciliano, the Christmas Carol. Da 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 ba ba da da yeah da 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 da, that kind of thing. It's a beautiful movement that Haydn enriched in this case from the original. The form of the movement's almost exactly the same as in the original, but he added a richer and more diverse exchange between woodwinds and strings at the very beginning. And you'll note the parabolic shape of the theme at the beginning, and which we've already talked about, and little 2-note and 3-note sniglets and all of those things. But just listen to the beautiful alternation between strings and winds and how they mix and combine and exchange and toss the musical material back and forth. It's just delicious. It's wonderful. So here it is. Now, after what you just heard comes a big middle section in the minor key, and then a return to the opening. It's just an ABA form, essentially, a very simple and songful movement. The minor key section is also in the concerto version, but it's deepened and made more aggressive and more weighty in the symphonic version, and it's really just a wonderful movement. So that's that. Now, the minuet. We only need to hear the basic minuet. The minuet begins with the woodwinds. Mostly everything else begins with strings, but this one is ya da dum bum bum ba da 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 bum. It's parabolic. It's actually very closely related to the opening of the Siciliano, which you'll notice yourself, that family of themes. And in this case, they're pretty closely related. And it's just, oh my goodness, so much fun with solo flute things and woodwind things and answered by the strings, and exactly in keeping with the concept of the entire symphony. So here's the whole minuet without repeats, just so that you can enjoy it. There. Wonderful music. Now, the finale also came from the concerto. And in this case, Haydn added a big, juicy, furry, hairy, exciting minor key episode. It's a rondo. Remember, rondos go A, B, A, B, or A, B, A, C, A, or they can go A, B, A, B, A. I mean, it's whatever you want. In this case, he added a really big episode in a minor key. And this big episode is really, really cool because it's based on music we heard from the first movement. So it had nothing to do originally with the concerto. And the music from the first movement is you may have remembered, the syncopated motive in the motion music between the first and second subjects. There was that thing that went da, 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 did that thing. I'm going to play it for you so I don't have to sing it. You will hear how he took that idea, this rugged, syncopated rhythm, and turned it into a big, fascinating episode in the finale. And it's another one of those examples where something, Haydn's long-range thinking of development isn't just like the little development section in the first movement. It isn't. Development can happen anywhere, and it can be of anything. And in this case, that syncopated rhythm was really catchy in the first movement. And when you hear it in the finale, you will immediately remember hearing it in the first movement, if you were paying attention. And it's just a fabulous way of binding the symphony together and unifying the original elements or the foreign elements with the new elements to make a completely fresh and organic totality. So here is the episode in the first movement. It's quite brief when it first shows up, and then how Haydn expands it into a whole aggressive paragraph in the finale. It's just marvelous. And listen to the little two-note sniglets at the end of the example from the finale. Because, yes, you'll hear those da-da-da or three-note sniglets, whatever they are. They're sniglets. Here you go. So you see, the fact that two of these movements originated elsewhere has nothing to do with robbing the symphony of any of its freshness or originality or workmanship or anything like that. Nothing at all. It has its own fabulous things just spread out all over. Now, the very end of the finale, I'm also going to play because that will give you, I want to play you the theme of the rondo, first of all, which you hear on its last appearance, and then the wonderful coda, which has adorable exchanges between strings and woodwinds, in little three-note sniglets, dun, 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 bum, 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 doo, 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 boom, boom, like that. And then a rousing conclusion ending with Haydn's characteristic three-chord finale, chong, 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 that we've been talking about now since really the beginning of the Paris symphonies, and even before, because he had done it before. But now it is absolutely his calling card. He won't end everything like it. He won't. Each symphony tells its own story. But as often as not, when he can, he will, and he does. And he does it here. So here is the theme of the rondo, and the delightful wrap-up, full of humor and Haydn's typical, sleight of hand. It's just wonderful. Here you go. And that is just a brilliant symphony. I always end with, why don't we hear these things? It's unbelievable. Do you really think that at this stage in his career, Haydn's going to write something that's not worth listening to? I mean, really? Well, he wasn't, and he didn't. And after this symphony, everything else that he wrote was to particular commission and came in a group of 3 and then 2 groups of 6. And that will wrap up the crusade in most respects. After that, we will only have to deal with 2 really early works that were discovered later, A and B, or misidentified, and the Symphonie Concertante. And we're going to be in business. And I am so excited to be at this stage. First of all, because I don't have to probably make the case quite as strenuously about how fabulous the music is, because most people kind of agree. And second of all, because it's just such great music. And it's such a thrill to be able to share it with you. So thank you so much for joining me. Tell your friends. Get everybody watching. The universe needs this desperately, I think. Well, not me, but I mean Haydn. You know what I mean. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.